really know why we always let the vile criminal Donald Nappy get away with his preferred name of Donald Nielsen, the Black Panther, whereas the rather more simpatico Archibald Thomson Hall is never given his chosen alias, Roy Fontaine. I can't help having a soft spot for Hall Fontaine. His crimes contain that saving element of comedy, which stops my professional life from being remorselessly bleak. Archibald was born in Glasgow in 1924. The son of a clerk, he soon evinced fastidious habits that would serve him well in later life. He washed his hands repeatedly. He enjoyed dressing up. Enjoyed, too, dressing up his little sister Violet and making her look her best. Carefulness for his own appearance and that of others would ultimately come to be the public front for his way of life. At 16, he was seduced by an older woman. She entertained him reasonably lavishly, and young Archie was hooked on life's little luxuries as offered by hotels. He also developed bisexuality. Another much older woman unintentionally introduced Archie to another clandestine activity, larceny. While his family lived in a large house, converted into separate flats, the lad became immensely friendly with an old lady who lived on her own in the block. At the same time, he became remarkably flush of cash. After her death, her apartment was found to be full of trunks stuffed with money. Archie had helped himself liberally, and may well have regretted not taking more when he realized that nobody else had known of the treasure store's existence. His hallmark, however, forgive the pun, was fraud. He started early and easily, registering as a collector for a Red Cross Flag Day, but getting hold of 2 tins. With one, he traversed the upmarket residential and shopping areas of Glasgow, filling it with valuable specie and notes. The other he took to the Gorbals, and it rattled pleasingly with the pennies of the poor. Now guess which he gave back to the Red Cross. In 1941, Hall's younger brother Donald was born. Well, his half-brother. Hall was convinced Donald was the outcome of a liaison between his mother and an army officer, and he appears to have resented Donald. Maybe the family contretemps made him reckless. At any rate, a few months after Donald's birth, the 17-year-old Archie collected his first prison sentence for theft. A couple of years later, he was done for housebreaking. Thus far, he had served the normal apprenticeship of the ordinary young villain, removing other people's portable property and making his way into their dwellings in order to do so. In 1947, he stood in the dock charged with uttering forged cheques as well as housebreaking. Now he was moving a little more upmarket. When he was convicted, he asked for a further 51 offences to be taken into consideration. Very professional of him. It wouldn't obviously do him a lot of good with the judge, thus to declare himself a seasoned villain, but the police would be delighted, if, indeed, they had not put him up to it in the first place. They could close their books and improve their clear-up rate, which, of course, only depends on their having someone established to be guilty in court. It doesn't mean you have to get your goods back. Tough titty crime victims, yours can be a very insignificant role in our penological system, which sometimes seems to be a rather private game of hide-and-seek, tit-for-tat, and punitive revenge, played between robbers, cops, and judges. In 1951, Hall took up that public front which was to serve him so well, and his employers so ill. He became a butler. He was clean, well-dressed, elegant, careful, well-mannered, intelligent. The qualities which made him an excellent fraudster also made him an outstanding butler. He could have lived comfortably and well in this suitable niche, but, alas, he wanted to live quite as comfortably and well as his employers. When he was working in Stirlingshire, he minded house during his employer's absence, and was fascinated by one particular envelope in their mail. Steaming it open, he discovered an invitation to a royal garden party at Holyrood House. Well, it would be a shame for the family to be unrepresented, wouldn't it? Archibald donned his master's morning suit, assumed his identity, and went to pay his respects to his sovereign. On the way home, he realized that he was well togged out for a visit to an antiques shop, casing the joint before he robbed it rotten. From now on, Hall was a con man with class. When he wanted fresh employment, he would forge himself excellent references. An employer was a mark. His cheques could be stolen and forged. Better still, his stocks and shares and bonds might be acquired and transferred to Hall's ownership for quick liquidation. One of his pranks showed his amusing sense of drama. As the world became aware of the increasing wealth of Arab oil sheikhs, Hall booked a grand hotel suite in an Arab name. He dyed his face, hands and wrists brown, and donned full Arab fig, jalabah, sunglasses, the lot. He swept up to the hotel in a hired Rolls-Royce, ensconced himself in his suite, and had the manager send for jewellers' representatives with samples of exquisite diamonds. When the jewellers arrived, the shy sheikh had retreated to the bathroom, around whose door his skinny brown hand clawed at the diamonds to inspect them. After a while, there was a prolonged silence from the bathroom. When the jewellers looked inside, they saw a pile of Arab clothes on the floor and an open door at the other side of the bathroom. In 1956, the fraudster who had posed as a peer and gained privileged access to an official mayoral reception at Taunton got a lagging. Sentences totaling 30 years preventive detention represented the judicial view that society was entitled to a rest from his activities. But he was a model prisoner and enjoyed parole after 7 years. He went back to work as a butler. He took to replacing guests' jewellery with glass and paste replicas. He worked briefly for property tycoon Charles Claw until his criminal record became known. In 1964, he pulled down another 10-year sentence. This time, he escaped and lived as a jewel thief until his recapture in 1966. In 1972, he was paroled to a hostel in Lancashire, where Irish Mary Coggle became his girlfriend. But in 1973 he went back to prison and stayed there for another 4 years. On his release, he went to work for Lady Hudson in Dumfriesshire. He looked after her house while she was away, and invited his recently released prison boyfriend, David Wright, to come up for a break in Scotland. Hall and David were both bisexual. Now, Archibald was enjoying a rest from criminal activity, and wanted to hold his job without suspicion for some time. But David thought it was ridiculously unprofessional to leave Lady Hudson's property unpurloined, and took a silver tray and a ring. Hall traced the ring to a girlfriend of David's, and persuaded her to give it back to him. David was furious, drank 4 bottles of Lady Hudson's champagne, forced his way into Hall's bedroom, and fired a shot at him from a rifle. Hall persuaded this dangerous young man to go to bed, and then faced the tiresome professional task of filling in the bullet hole in his headboard, staining and varnishing it. He could do without David Wright round his neck. He invited him to come shooting rabbits the next day, and once Wright had emptied his shotgun at the distant bunnies, Hall shot him 3 times in the head. He dumped the body midstream in a convenient burn, and covered it with rocks and gravel. The hiding place proved perfect. David Wright did not rise to the surface, and he was not apparently missed. Archibald Hall had got away with murder. In 1977, Lady Hudson learned about his criminal record, and decided that her butler would have to go. Hall returned to London, where, with his usual forged references, he quickly obtained employment at the Sloane Street mansion flat of Walter and Dorothy Scott-Elliott. They were a very rich elderly couple. Scott-Elliott, 82 years old by that time and slightly senile, was a former junior minister in the Attlee government. But he was one of the wealthy socialists. He had houses in France and Italy, and valuable paintings and antiques all over his flat. His handsome Anglo-Indian wife was prosperous in her own right, though a martyr to arthritis. Archibald Hall was a treasure. a first-rate butler who was soon invaluable to the old couple, and knew all their business. He realized that this was one of the jobs where the best results would be obtained if he took stocks and share certificates, making over really great wealth to himself, rather than getting what was left after a fence had devalued hot jewellery. He also decided that the best way of getting the certificates would be a faked burglary. If a break-in resulted in the loss of some antiques, the same thief might be held responsible for taking the important and valuable papers if their loss was noticed. Archie needed an accomplice. In November, he went for a drink in the Lancelot pub in Baker Street. Who should he find in there but his old Lancashire girlfriend, Mary Coggle? With her was a good-looking young man who had just absconded from his bartending job in South London with £1,000. Just the sort of accomplice Hall needed, though he seems to have formed the erroneous impression that Michael Kitto was a skilled and experienced burglar, and not just a sneak thief. On the 8th of December, while Mrs. Scott-Elliott was away taking a rest cure at a nursing home, Hall brought Kitto into the flat during the night to case the joint. Imagine his surprise when, on leading the would-be burglar into Mrs. Scott-Elliott's bedroom, he found the lady sitting up in bed, extremely startled by this unheralded visit from her butler and an unknown man. She had been discharged suddenly and unexpectedly from the nursing home. Hall acted with unadmirable promptitude and presence of mind. He suffocated Dorothy Scott-Elliott with her pillow. The noise woke up Walter, who wandered out of his own bedroom to find out what the noise was. Hall told him that Dorothy had had a nightmare, but he had now settled her down. This satisfied the old man, and he'd reached that state of elderly vagueness where he was quite used to failing to recognize people around him. He asked no questions about the mysterious Michael Kitto, probably not wanting to cause any embarrassment by his vagaries. Walter Scott-Elliott had beautiful manners. But what was now to be done with the late Mrs. Scott-Elliott? Well, in the morning, Archibald decided to deposit her in the very safe hiding place he'd found for David Wright. Old Walter was told that his wife was sleeping late and dispatched to his club for lunch. Hall and Kitto then went round to Mary Coggle and persuaded her to join them in their scheme to deceive the unwitting widower. He was vague enough that he would do pretty much what he was told, provided he was ever so slightly OD'd on his sleeping pills. But he would want to know where his wife was. So Mary was asked to come along on the long drive north, wearing Dorothy Scott-Elliott's mink coat and a wig, and passing herself off as the old lady. Astonishingly, this dotty plan worked. While I love to imagine the accent and solecistic grammar which Miss Coggle used, it seems that Walter never did more than peer at her occasionally, and in general accepted that this complete stranger really was the wife of his bed. In fact, of course, Dorothy was stowed in the boot of the rolls, at least as far as Cumbria, where the plan changed slightly, and she was buried in a shallow grave. The next detail was to kill Walter. This happened after the party had passed the night at a comfortable hotel in Blair Athol, where the retired politician gravely and courteously thanked the staff for the comfort of his visit. He ended his days in a copse near Glen Affric, where he too was buried in a shallow grave. Back in Edinburgh that night, Mary Coggle declared her wish to keep the mink coat. She even stripped to the buff, lay on it in front of the fireplace, and seduced Archibald to add to her persuasiveness. But Hall and Kitto knew that the real money remained to be recovered from the Scott-Elliott's bank balances and shareholdings. The safety of that haul would be threatened if Mary went round amateurishly showing off a new coat which might be traced and identified. Mary was absolutely obstinate, and started a furious quarrel when Hall decided to burn the coat. Hall hit her over the head with a poker, and suffocated her with a plastic bag. She went to her last rest in a stream crossing the Glasgow-Carlisle road. The preliminary work of clearing out the Scott-Elliott bank accounts went very successfully. Hall and Kitto enjoyed Christmas. But then Hall's young half-brother Donald was released from prison and joined them. Now, Archibald despised Donald. Not only did he seem to be the progeny of some disreputable frolic in Mrs. Hall's life, but Donald had a couple of convictions for child molesting. Like most professional crooks, Hall loathed nonces. Still, Donald accompanied Hall and Kitto up to a cottage they'd hired at Newton Arlosh in Cumberland. Possibly Hall intended to add stones to the body of Mary Coggle in the stream. A steady replenishment of the subaquatic cairn had done much to keep David Wright out of sight. In the cottage, Donald, who was clearly hopelessly unreliable and unfit to be an accomplice in any crime, started to display some incautious curiosity about the source of Hall and Kitto's funds. The two men felt that he must be eliminated, and Donald himself gave them the opportunity when he boasted that he would show them how to tie up a man with 6 inches of string. He lay on his face on the floor, telling them to tie his thumbs together behind his back, and then push his legs through his arms. It worked, and with Donald helpless, Hall and Kitto enthusiastically chloroformed him and drowned him in the bath. They put him in the boot of their car and headed for Scotland the next day, looking for another good gravesite. In the evening, they stopped at the Blenheim House Hotel, North Berwick, where their lack of luggage and general manner aroused the manager's suspicion. He imagined they might intend to leave without paying their bill, and called the police to ask if any con men were known to be in the district driving a Ford Granada. He gave the registration number. Alas for criminal habits. A quick check on vehicle registration showed that the Granada ought to be an escort. A further check showed that its tax disc, as well as its number plates, was bogus. Hall and Kitto were at dinner when the police asked them to come down to the station and explain themselves. Hall didn't stay around long to do so. He asked if he could go to the lavatory, slipped out of the window, and did a runner. That led the police to suspect something more serious than road tax evasion and car theft. They searched the car and found Donald Hall in the boot. Hall was caught in a taxi, heading for Dundee, and in 1978 he was handed a life sentence without possibility of parole.